involved in advancing the 9-element plan implementation, and they're doing so through a variety of projects. So it's great to work with such a great group of folks out here. And okay, just letting me know that it's starting to be recording. I don't know why it just popped up.
I forgot to start it.
Okay, that's why. All right, sounds good. All right, so element F of the plan, you've got to estimate a schedule to implement the BMPs that are identified in the plan. And the Genesee plan laid out a 25-year implementation schedule for the recommended BMPs. And it specifies that the high priority watersheds, which are in red on the map here, and this map's pulled out of the plan right out of there. And the high priority watersheds we wanted to be done within 10 years from the plan date, so by 2025. Medium priority watersheds shown in yellow by 2030 or 15 years from the plan date, and low priority watersheds within 25 years or by 2040, and those are all shown in green. And you can see most of the medium priority sites or watersheds are in the upper part of the watershed, and then it's a mix of low and high priorities in the mid and low part of the watershed. And as I was saying, the first deadline is in 2025, so there's still ample time to do work and add to the significant amount of work that's already been done in the watershed. So like I said, there's tons of opportunities out there. I'll be talking about grant opportunities, so we can still keep moving this forward as we go. And then element G here, you got to describe milestones and the estimated timeframes for BMP implementation. And so these metrics I have up here are implementation metrics that were established in the plan to measure progress towards agricultural BMP implementation. And they include measures to assess how you're doing with stream bank stabilization, buffer strips, grassed waterways, cover crops, contouring, and conservation tillage. And although it wasn't included in the plan as an implementation metric, another metric that could be used could be the number of wastewater discharges that have had a 1 milligram per liter phosphorus effluent limit implemented. Phosphorus effluent limit is incredibly difficult to say quickly. But and with all the background work that went into this presentation, we've been tossing around the idea of working with some of our partners to do a more in-depth evaluation of the progress made on the plan to date. And we're interested in hearing your thoughts on the matter, either during the panel discussion later or over email, however you're comfortable sharing your thoughts with us. So like I said, love to hear your thoughts on that, and if you're interested in trying to help out with a more in-depth evaluation. So element H, and I'm almost done with these criteria here. Element H identifies the criteria that will be used to assess the water quality improvements as the plan is implemented. And the plan includes assessment criteria for both the pollutants, total phosphorus, and total suspended solids as measured at the Genesee River at Ford Street USGS gauge station. And the language in the plan specifies criteria for soluble reactive phosphorus and suspended sediment concentration, which are taken directly from other documents. The goal for soluble reactive phosphorus is taken from the GLRI Action Plan 2010, and the criteria for suspended sediment concentration is adopted from the Rochester Embayment Remedial Action Plan. But the writers of the 9-element plan were nice to us and converted these criteria into more relatable terms as total phosphorus and total suspended solids measurements. And the goals in those more relatable terms are to reduce annual loads of total phosphorus and total suspended solids by approximately 8% and 40% respectively. And that amounts to approximately 79,000 pounds per year of total phosphorus and about 340 million pounds of total suspended sediment. And the final element of the 9-element plan is to describe a monitoring plan to collect water quality data used to measure improvements using the criteria in element H. So there are a bunch of monitoring programs that are mentioned in the plan that include DEC's Rotating Intensive Basin Studies program, which included the whole Genesee Basin most recently in 2014 and 2019. There are also several USGS gauge sites scattered throughout the watershed, but given its relation to the assessment criteria in element H, I think the most important of these gauges to monitor is the gauge at Ford Street in Rochester. And there was also additional monitoring conducted by the DEC and USGS. At the time, it had been going on for 2 years when the plan was written, but continued from 2013 to 2018. And then lastly, Monroe County has monitored several of the tributaries in the lower watershed, including the Awaka, Black, and Hanoi Creeks, in addition to the lower Genesee. And so now that I'm through those 9 elements, can move on to the status of phosphorus effluent limits in the Genesee Basin. So first, I should explain why we're even interested in phosphorus in the first place, since that's what the whole conversation hinges on here. And we're interested in it because phosphorus is a limiting nutrient in freshwater systems, which means it is the critical nutrient for photosynthetic organisms like algae and submerged aquatic vegetation that's depleted most rapidly, so it limits their growth. Therefore, when there's excessive phosphorus loading, it can stimulate nuisance algal growth, harmful algal blooms, submerged aquatic vegetation growth, and when these blooms die off or large areas of vegetation senesce and die off at the end of the season, there can be a depletion of oxygen, which can cause other problems like fish kills. And phosphorus loading is a particular concern in the Genesee Basin because the region is dominated by agricultural land uses, which can contribute substantial amounts of phosphorus to the system. And so the map on the left here shows all of the publicly owned treatment works in the Genesee Basin, and there are 27 publicly owned treatment works, which are just wastewater treatment facilities that are owned by municipalities. And some of these contribute more phosphorus loading than others, and 7 of them were identified in the 9-element plan as high priority sites for implementation of the 1 milligram per liter phosphorus effluent limits. Told you it was hard to say. And it's on these high priority discharges that'll be focused. But real quick, you can take a look at the DEC info locator if you're interested in seeing where all of the point source discharges and not just the POTWs are. And the DEC info locator has a ton of great environmental layers. So if you're interested in just learning a ton of interesting stuff about your watershed, I recommend checking that resource out. And I can include that in my page of links that I'm going to send out. And so here are the 7 high priority discharges that were called out in the plan where it would be cost effective to implement a milligram per liter phosphorus effluent limit. And as I mentioned earlier, the 9-element plans are non-regulatory. So these were recommendations, but weren't legally binding in any sense. And the plan did say that if the proposed effluent limits for these 7 plants were all implemented, that it was estimated the loading of phosphorus to the river could be reduced by approximately 22,900 pounds per year. And as you can see, all of these high priority watersheds in the map are in the mid-lower part of the basin, which is consistent with those high priority watersheds that we saw earlier on the slides. And then here's the list of the 7 publicly owned treatment works that were identified as high priorities for the implementation of that 1 milligram per liter phosphorus effluent limit. Got it that time. And of the 7 of them, 5 of them have some form of a 1 milligram per liter phosphorus limit included in their permit. And so the 7 facilities real quick were Avon, the Canisius Lakeville facility, Geneseo, Leroy, Mount Morris, Perry, and Warsaw. And the limits that are currently active include the Avon, Geneseo, Leroy, and Warsaw facilities. The limit applies year-round at the Leroy facility, and they're required to meet phosphorus load limits as well as a monthly average concentration limit. The Geneseo facility has a seasonal limit that applies from May 1st through October 1st. Warsaw's limit is effective when the annual average flow exceeds 1 million gallons per day. And Avon has a combination of the two where seasonal limits apply, same as Geneseo, May 1st through October 1st, unless the 12-month rolling average flow exceeds 1 million gallons per day. And then if that flow rate's exceeded, the milligram per liter limit is implemented regardless of the season. The Lakeville facility was set to be the 5th one to have the P limit implemented, but that was supposed to go into effect as of the 1st of this year, but if you can see there's a little asterisk next to that. That's because Livingston County had just applied to DEC for an extension on the implementation of that limit, but and the DEC just received the request recently, so all we really know right now is they're reviewing their request carefully, but no determination has been made yet onto whether they're going to approve that extension or not. And then the Mount Morris and Perry facilities, which both are either monitor concentration only for Mount Morris or monitor concentration and load for the Perry facility. Both have design flows and actual measured flows less than 1 million gallons per day and don't have P limits, which is consistent with DEC's guidance on the matter, which is a Technical and Operational Guidance Series 1.3.3. Again, I can throw that in the links to everyone. And I'll make a note, it's going to be page 10 you're looking for on there is that information. And then of the remaining publicly owned treatment works in the watershed, there's 2 of them, the Dansville and Wellsville facilities that do have design flows that are over 1 million gallons per day. And both of these facilities do currently have phosphorus limits. And the limit at Wellsville is 1 milligram per liter year round, and the limit at Dansville is 1 milligrams per liter when the monthly average flow exceeds 1 million gallons per day. And so I just wanted to touch on a couple other things that the DEC is doing to help limit phosphorus loading. And the first is the nutrient runoff law, which is the technical citation for it's there, the Environmental Conservation Law, Article 17, Title 21, and Agriculture and Markets Law, Part 146G, which became effective January 2012. And this law prohibits application of lawn fertilizers between December 1st and April 1st, prohibits fertilizer application on impervious surfaces and within 20 feet of a water body unless specific criteria are met. If the fertilizer is spilled, it's got to be cleaned up and not rinsed away. And it limits the use of phosphorus-containing fertilizers and prohibits retailers from selling phosphorus-containing detergents, which takes some of the pressure off of consumers to check what they're buying, at least for the detergents. And this rule is only applicable to lawns and doesn't apply to agricultural fertilizers or fertilizers with 0.67 or less in the middle. And if anyone's unfamiliar with reading fertilizer labels, the numbers indicate the nutrient content of the fertilizer, the leftmost number representing nitrogen, the center representing phosphate, and the last number representing potash or potassium. And then moving on, we've got the nutrient criteria that DEC is working on, a phosphorus standard for surface waters. But given that that's still under development and I'm not directly involved with that process, I'm going to hold off commenting on it anymore, but just wanted to mention that for anyone who's interested. And then on to the grant opportunities that I promised I'd get to a couple times. Sorry about that. But there's several grant opportunities, which is why I don't have them listed on the screen here, because it would have been a whole slide just packed with text that no one really needs. Then I can follow up with links for people. But right now we have the consolidated funding application out for New York State, which includes a lot of great programs that include the Water Quality Improvement Project Program, the Non-Agricultural Non-Point Source and MS4 Mapping Grant, the Climate Smart Communities Program, grant funding opportunities, the Green Innovation Grants Program through the Environmental Facilities Corporation, the Local Waterfront Revitalization Program through the Department of State, and the New York State Parks, Heritage, and Preservation Grants through the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. And so all those are contained in the CFA. The CFA contains a lot of other funding opportunities as well, but those are the ones that I wanted to highlight for that could help implement this plan. DEC has also worked with New York Sea Grant to release this year's New York Great Lakes Basin Small Grants Program. That's for not-for-profits, municipalities, counties, regional planning boards, environmental commissions, and educational institutions. Grant awards are up to $50,000 and are looking for projects that are pulled directly out of plans, whether comprehensive plans, watershed management plans, and that we're looking for proposals that are going to implement plans right as they are pulled right out of the plan, or projects pulled right out of a plan. There's also funding opportunities through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative for a variety of projects. There is money if you're dealing with septic systems. The plan calls out the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and DEC and Environmental Facility Corporation Engineering Planning Grants. There's also the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, and that is through the NRCS. And there's also the Natural Resources Damage Claim Funds for projects if you're below the lower falls. And that is my real quick run through of all of the grant opportunities that are out there. And I'm sure that is not all of the grant opportunities, but those are some great ones to highlight. Like I said, got a page of links for everyone. And now my contact information actually is up on the screen. So if anyone has any questions that we don't get to in the panel discussion today, feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call. I'm happy to talk with you about them. And I'll follow up. I can drop a pile of links in the chat once I'm all done here. But I guess I can stop sharing now and turn things over to Kelly. But let me just get out of here.
Thank you, Ryan.
All right. No problem. All right, should be back to you.
All right. Thank you, Ryan. That was a lot of information. Did a very good job presenting that.
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, there's a lot of info in that plan.
Yes.
For sure.
All right. Can everybody see my title slide?
Yep, very nice.
Okay. Okay.
Gotcha.
All right. Just want to make sure it's in presentation mode. Sometimes I can't tell. So good morning, everybody. I'm Kelly Emmerich. I'm the Executive Director for Monroe County Soil and Water Conservation District. I've been the manager here since 2010, but I have been with Soil and Water Conservation Districts for almost 18 years now. Started my career in Cayuga County, where there's a lot of agriculture, a lot of dairy farms in that area. So that's how I started my career. Now I'm certified professional in erosion and sediment control, stormwater management, and municipal stormwater management. So my expertise really lies in working with the county and the municipalities on development projects for stormwater management and pollution prevention during construction, after construction. We do a ton of training here at this district for contractors, engineers, municipal employees on that aspect. And then of course, most districts, including ours, has an agricultural program as well. So today's presentation is going to be focused on the agricultural best management practices that have been implemented within the Genesee River Basin over the years. So I wasn't sure what exactly our audience was going to be, so I wanted to start out and just talk a little bit about soil and water conservation districts. So they were established throughout the US in response to the Dust Bowl from the 1930s. And then in 1940, the New York State Soil Conservation District law was passed, which then created the Soil and Water Conservation Committee in New York State. And that mission was to advance all the comprehensive natural resource management throughout New York State and the support of local soil and water conservation districts. So that conservation state district law gave the counties in New York the authority to create the local soil and water conservation districts here. New York State has 58 soil and water conservation districts. So they're in each county, and there's cover the 5 boroughs of New York City. And we really are recognized as the local leaders on water quality, soil health, community and natural resource resiliency, green infrastructure, and other local natural resources concerns. So I like to tout our organization as we really are the boots on the ground, working with the residents, the landowners, the municipalities, and the county to be able to assist these residents and stakeholders throughout our county, and then possibly try and implement solutions to environmental concerns. So a lot of our funding, the majority of our funding comes from the Environmental Protection Fund, which is where DEC is funded out of as well. And then we get a very robust support from the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets. So this has really allowed the state committee, which is the up top, the Soil and Water Conservation Committee, our state office, and conservation districts to really expand our operations, including, staffing and project implementation to meet landowner and community needs. So in 2016, the Genesee River Watershed Coalition of Conservation Districts was established, and this was through a memorandum of understanding under that New York State Soil and Water Conservation District law between the 10 soil and water conservation districts within the Genesee River Basin. So that also includes Potter County, Pennsylvania. And then the purpose of this coalition was to work together to promote and implement conservation and improve natural resources on the lands on both public and private lands within the Genesee River watershed. So that New York State Conservation District law that we operate under allows districts to work on private land to implement projects, which is unique in each county throughout the state, because as you probably know, a lot of municipalities in the county cannot work on private land. So that gives us the opportunity to implement agricultural projects as well as other various projects that help with the environment. So the startup funding for the coalition was provided through a contract with the Department of Agriculture and Markets, because that's where the State Soil and Water Conservation Committee department is under the umbrella of Ag and Markets. So our office here, Monroe County, has a contract with Ag and Markets to start up the coalition and go through the work that I'm going to talk about. So Ryan did a good job of showing the Genesee River Basin, but as you can see here, there's the 10 counties starting all the way down Potter County, Pennsylvania, and then moving upwards, Allegheny, Cattaraugus, Steuben, Wyoming, Ontario, Monroe, Genesee, Orleans, throughout the whole entire watershed. And here in Monroe County, we take all the water at the end of pipe, so to speak, before it goes to Lake Ontario. So it's interesting, this coalition really allowed us to work with Potter County, Pennsylvania. One of the caveats with that is when we talk about funding, unfortunately, New York State funding cannot be used in Pennsylvania. But we do include them on the coalition, on the meetings, on outreach, on working with them and asking them for input to improve the watershed. So talking about some of the programs out of the coalition, the first program I'll talk about here is the Genesee River Interseeding Program. So we purchased 2 interseeder machines from Interseeder Technologies in 2017. And this funding was provided by the Great Lakes Commission out of Michigan. Back when Gary Overmeyer was the director there. I'm sure folks, from Genesee RiverWatch are familiar with his name. We purchased 2 machines that were developed by Penn State University. And interseeders are a tool, a fairly newer tool that allow farmers to drill cover crops into a standing cash crop. So the idea is that while they have their cash crop on, they can put down the cover crop between the rows, and that gives that cover crop more time to grow before winter. So the benefit with cover crops is that they protect the soil over winter, so the ground isn't bare. And they also provide other numerous benefits, such as recycling nitrogen in the soil, protect it from erosion, and then they add a lot of organic matter and break up compaction over the winter as well. The program we purchased them in 2017. It took almost a year to set up the program through developing rates, details regarding the machines, lease agreements. So when we rent them out to the farms, they sign on to an agreement, insurance requirements, all that fun stuff that comes along with owning equipment. So it did take us a good year to work out all those details, and we ended up purchasing as well a no-till drill attachment for one of the machines. And the idea behind no-till is that they disturb very little soil, so it's not your typical moorboard plowing that you might be familiar with agriculture. They disturb very little soil, and the growers plant right into the previous year's crop residue. Then it cuts through all the organic matter, retains surface residue, reduces soil erosion, and increases water infiltration, and also helps with soil health while reducing carbon emissions as well. So no-till is very, very popular, very useful. And I will say that it's a lot more popular than interseeding at this time. So overall, the success of the program, it's been some growing pains with this program. I can say that these machines are not really built that well. We haven't been very impressed with them. There's been a lot of maintenance issues, a lot of major maintenance issues with them unexpectedly. And so it's been a slow go getting it up and running. And some of the other hurdles have been some of our farms don't have the ability to carry the insurance to haul the machine around. And the idea was that we had two machines. So one would be in the upper watershed. So one is housed at Genesee County Soil and Water, and the other is housed at the lower watershed, and then the upper watershed is housed at Allegheny County Soil and Water. So the idea was it would be housed there and then move county to county. Well, the problem has been is the interseeding window is very, very short. So it's almost impossible to move those machines county to county and meet the farm needs. So right now they've been being used in mostly Allegheny County and Genesee, which is fine because there's still work getting done. And so in 2019 was the first time one of the machines was rented and interseeded 100 acres. And then there was also a conservation field day held in Livingston County at one of the farms there to demonstrate the equipment to the farms that were in attendance. And we interseeded 12 acres into a corn stand to demonstrate the equipment. So that was the first time it was used. And then in 2021, it picked up, but it hasn't been used much for interseeding. More popular is the no-tilling. So there's been over 1,000 acres of farmland that have been seeded across 15 farms using the no-till drill. So the other interesting note with the program is that so this technology and these machines were developed by Penn State. And Penn State has also come in and partnered with the coalition, and they have started trials in 2021 on 2 farms within the watershed. And what they're doing is collecting data to investigate the benefits and drawbacks of interseeding in Western New York and Northern PA. So there hasn't been any release of that research yet. So once that is released, we'll certainly have that data available. So some of the programs that are directly through the coalition. So in 2017, we were awarded funds through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative for the Genesee River Watershed Phosphorus and Sediment Reduction Project. This project has been completed. It closed out at the end of 2021. The final report was just submitted to environmental protection agencies. So this was directly through EPA. And so that report has been finalized, and these are the results of that project. We spent $646,000 on GLRI funds on implementing agricultural best management practices. And we had almost $86,000 matched to that in local and state funds. So here our goal was to reduce, as Ryan mentioned, soil erosion, and with that loading of sediment and nutrients by implementing these ag BMPs. So this was across 7 different counties within the watershed. And overall, by implementing the practices that are shown here, we've saved over almost 7,000 pounds of phosphorus over the lifespan of these BMPs, and about 1,200 tons of sediment. over the lifespan. So those practices vary from, and Ryan had mentioned some of these in the 9-element plan: cover cropping, grass waterways, stream exclusions, critical area planting, diversions, residue and tillage management, water and sediment control basins, subsurface drainage, forest buffers along riparian areas, agricultural stream crossings, some stream bank stabilization adjacent to farmland, providing access roads to farmsteads, and putting in livestock pipelines. So those are the practices and the outcomes of this project. And of course, I think everybody will probably get a copy of this presentation as well after. So if you're interested, I'm guessing, George, that'll go out to everybody.
Yes,
Both
that's
of them?
correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So another project that is through the Genesee River Watershed Coalition is the Genesee River Watershed Stream Bank Erosion Remediation Project. So we were awarded $200,000 to implement stream bank stabilization and riparian buffers on lands near agriculture. So this project only is within 3 counties within the watershed: Allegheny, Genesee, and Monroe. And then we have committed to about $56,000 in local and state funding match for this project. So our goals for this project is phosphorus reduction over the life of the practices at about almost 1,200 pounds, and then total soil sediment savings over the life of the practice at about 1,400 tons. So what we've committed to is 6.7 acres of riparian forest buffer on multiple sites in 2 counties, and stabilization of 800 feet of stream bank on at least 3 sites in 2 of the counties. So here, for example, these are 2 of the sites that are in the grant to be remediated. So in Monroe County, you see here, this is actually a Waka Creek, a highly regarded trout stream here in Monroe County. Over in the town of Wheatland, high agricultural area, and is slated to be remediated through this project. And then on the right is an example of one of Allegheny County's projects. You can see the severe erosion there on the bank. Right at the top of bank is tillable farmland. So again, these are slated to be completed in this grant. They've not been done yet. So those are the projects that are ongoing with the coalition as a whole. But just for as far as funding comes in, but each district, soil and water conservation district in the Genesee River Basin applies for funding, and a lot of them are awarded. So this graph represents Ag BMP implementation funding either applied for or awarded from 2017 to 2021. So the reason I have this data is because the coalition started in 2016 and really started compiling reports from the coalition as a whole in 2017. So I manage that contract with Ag and Markets. So I asked the districts in the coalition to give me this information on a semi-annual basis to report to Ag and Markets. I should mention too that DEC actually provided the funding to Ag and Markets for the coalition. I forgot to mention that earlier. So these reports that we send in go to them and to DEC. So I've been able to track this, and Ryan mentioned that there's a lot of funding available for projects. So here I list it by grant funding source. So awarded is in the green, applied is in the blue. So applied, we're not sure if it's been awarded yet, but The green under ag non-point source, that's the agricultural non-point source pollution prevention and abatement program. That is a state program through Ag and Markets. It's competitive amongst soil and water conservation districts for that funding. The next program, well, Ag non-point, you can see that we've been awarded, well, districts in the basin have been awarded almost $3 million in funding from this time period, and then applied for over 3 million. CRF, that's climate resilient farming, also a funding source through Ag and Markets for soil and water conservation districts, and over 500,000 has been awarded. That's a newer program for soil and water conservation compared to Ag non-point sources in its 28th year. Climate resilient farming is in its 6th year. So, you know, both very successful programs. And then over $1 million has been applied for under that program that's pending. EBM is ecosystem-based management. Department of Ag and Markets gets some money every year to issue what we call mini grants to soil and water conservation districts to implement erosion and sediment control practices on farmland. So it's a much smaller program. I believe the limit is 50,000 max per farm for this program. So versus Ag non-point, where you can apply for any amount of money you want. There's no cap on it. So these are much smaller, much less expensive type practices on farms, and also can go down to the smaller farms, a little bit less competitive. So recently, that's a pretty recent program. It started in 2015, and the funding for that is specific to watersheds. So originally it was just the Genesee River Basin, and then they expanded it to some of the Finger Lakes region too. CAFO waste storage program, you can see there's been a lot of money awarded for that. Almost 3.5 million. That was a specific program for concentrated animal feeding operations that was put aside, so to speak. I can't think of the word I'm trying to think of, by the governor, by Cuomo when he was in office, to put storage and transfers on CAFO farms so they're not spreading in the winter months. So that was the big successful program. And this is just the Genesee River Basin. That's a statewide program. So you can only imagine the cost of the funding across the state. FLOPA funding, that's the Finger Lakes, Lake Ontario Watershed Protection Alliance. A lot of soil and water districts in the basin receive that money directly. That's also an environmental protection fund line item. And so some of the districts in the basin used it to implement agricultural BMPs. And then RCPP. So far, all these programs are state. Just want to mention that. And so RCPP is Regional Conservation Partnership Program. That's a federal program with NRCS. And I believe that Genesee County was awarded a little less than 150,000 for some erosion and sediment control projects. New York State Part C. So that is funding that districts receive under conservation district law. So we have a series of performance measures that we have to meet with Ag and Markets, and then we receive funding for that. And so some districts, once you earn that money, you can use it for whatever you want. And a lot of districts use it for projects, and some chose throughout this time period to use it for Ag BMPs. New to the Ag Environmental Management Program, or AEM, is cost sharing for farms. So AEM has been around for since the 90s, and it's always been a technical assistance program, which I'll talk about more about AEM later. I have a whole slide on it. And recently, within the last 3 years, they've added a cost share program for farm implementation of practices to this program. So it's going to show to be a little bit lower because it's pretty new for districts, but I think over time we'll see that significantly go up as this funding has continued to be available through that program. And then finally, the Great Lakes Commission, that's a federal program as well. And that is money that's been applied for ag BMPs. So talking about ag BMPs, we're throwing around all these terms, thought it would be a good idea to go through some of them brief. I'm not going to have all of them. I don't have enough time for that, but you know, we've been listing them. We've been saying the names of them. So I'm going to go through some of these practices that have been implemented that are focused on erosion and nutrient reduction on ag lands. So cover cropping, I talked about that already during the interseeder program. Here's some examples of cover cropping. So on the left, we have an example of a radish wheat cover crop, what is also known as a tillage radish. So this is just one combination of cover cropping that can be used. There's a whole host of different mixes. It just depends on what works for the farm, what they're growing, what time of year they can get it in. So the districts offer that assistance with planning that cover crop with the farm. So what works best for them, but tillage radishes are known to reduce compaction significantly. And also they fix a lot of nitrogen as a cover crop. So you can see the radish up close. And unfortunately they're not edible. So they look delicious, but they're not. So we decided to try one here one time and it was not good. So riparian buffers, I'm going to focus on riparian herbaceous buffers. So herbaceous buffers versus forest buffers. So this isn't where you're going to be planting shrubs and trees. This is the use of grasses and sedges, rushes, ferns, legumes, forbs, those types of herbaceous type plants that can tolerate flooding, you know, deeply wet soils in the area between the aquatic habitat, whether it's a stream or a wetland, and the upland area. So you can see here two projects with those buffers, those herbaceous buffers installed both on the left and the right. The one on the right, I just put an arrow there because it's hard to tell where the stream is, but the stream is actually right there through the wooded area. So this provides a good buffer between that stream and the farmstead. I'm sure everybody knows the benefits of buffers, but they're really great to improve water quality, improve fish and wildlife habitat. They work really well to provide a filter from runoff from farm fields or the farmsteads. They can provide water storage on floodplains, and they do help with stream bank stability by reducing erosion from any equipment or livestock that may be entering those buffer areas and trying to get into the streams. Stream exclusion fencing, also known as access control. So this is basically excluding animals, people, vehicles, and equipment from an area. So this is used very often on wetland or stream scenarios where you don't want the animals in those areas to help protect them. So on the left, you see this fencing. Hopefully everybody can see the fencing there around that wetland area that's present, that hydric area. So where the cows are the pasture, and the fence has been put in to exclude them from that wet area to protect it. On the right, same thing. This is where livestock has been separated from a stream. So we have a good buffer off the stream, and then the fence is put up on top of the bank and keeps the livestock out of that stream to protect it from erosion, protect it from impairments to water quality, such as like fecal matter, all that type of stuff. Water and sediment control basins. So basically these are pretty popular, at least in our county. We work with a lot of crop farmers. So they basically are an earth embankment or a combination ridge and channel constructed across the slope of a field, and usually in a minor drainage way that shouldn't be there. It's usually a concentrated flow or gully erosion that's taking place in a farm field that needs to be remediated to reduce that gully erosion that's happening. And then they take it and they trap sediment and they reduce the runoff that's happening in the field. So you can see here, they're very, they're designed so they work with the farm and how they plow. So they plow and farm around them. And you can see the standpipe there. So the sediment accumulates in the grassy basin area and holds the water and the sediment. And then the standpipe, the yellow standpipe has perforations in it. And so the water seeps through the standpipe and then it goes to an underground outlet, safely transported to a stable outlet. So, and these are pretty popular again. We have actually one under construction right now in our county in the Genesee River Basin. Waterways, this is pretty straightforward. It's a shaped or graded channel and that's established on a farm field that uses suitable material or vegetation. It basically is put there to convey surface water at a non-erosive rate. So when we work with the farms, they'll have issues with erosion or flooding in their farm field. They're unable to farm it. So we can implement these types of practices. So here on the left, we have a grass waterway. It's meant to be very wide, very shallow, and it uses suitable vegetation that is spec'd out by the Soil and Water Conservation District based on how fast the water is moving through here to make sure that it doesn't erode. These are meant to be mowable by the farm. They're meant to allow farms to cross them with equipment so that they can still farm their land, but have this area where it holds and conveys water for them without impacting their fields. And then the line waterway is very similar. Those typically are obviously not mobile because they use either stone, turf reinforcement mat, or other permanent material. I've never seen one concrete on a farm. It typically looks like what's shown here on the right, the stone base, and that's basically put in because the gradient is too steep for a grass waterway. Grass waterways are really on flat lands. Those are actually more common in our county, but you get over, these were actually outside the Genesee River Basin. Cayuga County sent me these. They have a much steeper gradient on that line waterway. They have a lot of hills, a lot of Finger Lakes hills, so their topography is much steeper, so you'd use the line waterway. But again, they convey that runoff without causing erosion or flooding. They help with the gully formations to keep those in check and overall protect and improve water quality. Strip cropping. So this is basically the farm comes in and grows planned rotations of erosion resistant crops and erosion susceptible crops. Or they leave, instead of putting in erosion resistant crops, they might leave that area fallow for the year. But it's a systematic arrangement of just what that means, strips across a field. So you can see on the left, this is Wyoming County Soil and Water. You can see the crop that is planted, the darker green, and then the erosion resistant plants are the lighter green. So they're just in strips, basically helping to reduce sheet and rill and wind erosion, helps with filtering nutrients, pesticides and sediment, which all reduces that transport to the surface waters, and then improves plant productivity and health as well when you have those rotations in. And then on the right, you can see a an aerial version of what strip cropping might look like on a hillside. So that's something that's very steep. That was also provided by Cayuga County, very steep near Skinny Atlas Lake. So they have those in for erosion control reasons. So that's what I have on ag BMPs. I want to talk now, I want to move into ag BMP web applications. So this is a project through the Genesee River Watershed Coalition. This is AEM best management practices implemented in the Genesee River Watershed through what I like to call a database of tracking them. So AEM, Ag Environmental Management, this is a New York State program. And as I mentioned earlier, it provides technical assistance to farmers to identify environmental risks on their farms, identify solutions through planning with the soil and water conservation districts, and implement those solutions through design and finding cost share funding for the farmers. Recently, as I mentioned, there's a cost share program through this as well now that's separate from the technical assistance track. But AEM, really the heart of AEM is this technical service providing by soil and water conservation districts to the farmers within the county. So the State Soil and Water Conservation Committee develops the policy and administers the program for AEM. I'll just note AEM is voluntary for farmers. It's not mandated. And AEM planning is developed through a tiered process at the county soil and water level. So it's a tier 1 through 5 where you collect information from the farm and inventory that information. Tier 2, you then follow up and do a site visit, walk the farm, document their current stewardship, as well as assess and prioritize any areas that might be of high concern, environmental concern to any sort of resource. So that's where you identify those areas that might be near streams, wetlands, all those high priority areas that might be of high concern on the farm. Tier 3 goes into further planning where you take those priority areas that were found on the farm and develop a conservation plan to address those concerns, and working with the farm the whole time to ensure that you're still meeting their farm goals and their operational goals. Tier 4 is where the implementation comes from. So all those BMPs we've been talking about, that's all through tier 4 through AEM. And we look for financial cost share funding to implement those plans that have been developed at the local level, as well as providing educational material and technical assistance during the implementation of those practices. And then tier 5 is going back out and evaluating those practices that have been installed to ensure environmental protection and farm viability has been met and the practices that are being maintained. If folks are interested in more on the state program, there's a link right here too, that hyperlinked when you get the presentation. You can look more into AEM if you're interested. So this Ag BMP web application basically is a custom web mapping solution to track, manage, and report on these AEM agricultural best management practices for farms within the Genesee River Basin. So within the 10-member county of the Genesee River Watershed Coalition. It was created through 2007, from 2017 to 2019, and was finalized and launched in 2019 for use. The funding for this is part of that seed money that is contracted by New York State Department of Ag and Markets from the DEC. And the application was built under contract with Bergman, and the server is housed by Monroe County GIS Department on behalf of the Genesee River Watershed Coalition. To date, historical data from 2010 to 2019 has been all captured into this application. And that all this data is protected under the New York State AEM program for farm confidentiality. So we do use this on a regular basis. I will note here that I was, when I was preparing for this program, we did have interns that implemented this data into this database for us back in 2019. However, there's one county in the basin, Ontario, that has not put their data in. So this will include all the counties except Ontario and Potter County, PA. So we don't have their access to their data. So here is what this database, this mapper looks like. There's a screenshot of it. So you can see here, it says AEM at the top. You can put in farm details. You put in their tier 1 information, that inventory. And then when they start implementing BMPs, you pick from this list of practices here. As you can see, you know, did they implement a manure storage, milk house waste, prescribed grazing, exclusion fence, cropland grass buffers. So there's a whole host of practices in here that districts use to implement practices on farms. And so you pick that and then you put in, so say here we're picking barnyard and runoff management. You can add a record, you put in the date of implementation, when it was inspected, if it was cost shared, and then when you go out to evaluate that practice. So all this information is in here. And then it shows up on a map or two in the basin to see where this practice is, which I don't have a screenshot of that. So this represents to 2010 to 2019. After that, individual counties are responsible for inputting their own data into the database. Every county has their own login. I know for Monroe County, we use this regularly. This is a great tool for us to track our practices and see where they are across the county. And of course, our county is very big on data and nutrient data, which is going to be the final goal of this project, which I'll talk about. And just remember, this only includes farms that participate in the AEM program. Okay, so there are farms out there that don't participate. So we can only track those that participate with us. So the total number of BMPs, 837. Owned farmland is almost 210,000 acres, and total rented farmland is 118.5 acres. So that's just within AEM participation. So the big goal of this as well, not only tracking the BMPs, but we've also incorporated modeling into this database. So we've used the STEP-L modeling. It's an Excel-based tool for estimating pollutant loads that's been developed by EPA. It's built in here to estimate nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment load reductions. Those loads are calculated by Watershed at the HUC 12 level, which is what the state requires us to report by. So that's why it's at that level, which basically takes the Genesee River Basin and breaks it up into smaller watersheds. So like Black Creek, Owaka Creek watershed are each their own HUC 12 watershed. So we're going to be able to run reports to calculate load reductions for the basin based off the model and the ag BMPs that are into the web application. And the model is completed, but however, I didn't run the load reductions. I did, but they're not going to be accurate because we need to revise the model for some of the BMP screens. So for example, cover crop, if I run from 2010 to 2019, cover crops is showing a bigger load reduction when run for a 10-year period because it's showing a load reduction in each of those years, but we know that cover crops are only a 1-year BMP. So they're put in for the winter and then they come off in the spring. So that needs to be revised to make it accurate, the modeling accurate. So those are going to be our next steps for the Genesee River. We have a new contract in place with Bergman right now. They've already started revising the web application, and that also includes updating that cover crop input screen for step L modeling loads. And also, we're having them add a filtering mechanism so we can run it, pick the watershed and, pick whatever watershed we want at the HUC 12 level and run those loads based on watershed. So when it's going to be finalized this year. So I'm really looking forward to that and going to be providing that information to Ag and Markets and to DEC that have been waiting patiently for this information. So it's been a long process, but it's a great tool for us to be using. We will, next steps for the coalition, we do also need to develop a strategy to support the 9-element watershed plan from the coalition members, AEM 5-year strategic plans that were just developed recently for Ag and Markets. And then we are in the process of looking for long-term funding for the coalition to support a long-term coordinator. So that is all I have. I hope I didn't go too far over. Probably did.
Oh, not bad. Thank you, Kelly.
You're welcome.
You could stop that share and we could open it up to questions. Anybody have any questions? Well, I had one. Oh, go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah. Hey, Kelly, how you doing?
Good. How are you, Charlie?
Good. Good to see you. I was just wondering what percentage of the farms or farm acres participate in the AEM program?
In the whole Genesee or just Monroe County, right now we have 600 farms participating. I don't know the percentage off the top of my head, Charlie.
Okay.
But, we do have 600 participants, but that's countywide, not just the basin. I'm not sure of the total percentage.
So that's 600 just for Monroe County?
Yeah. Yep.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So, you're always going to have the farms that, I can, don't want to name names, but we do have farms that we've tried to work with that, I hate to say it, won't change until there's turnover at the management level, so that we can get the next generation in to work with. So, we do have still probably a high percentage that don't participate. They have this, either they want to do it the way they've always done it, or we're the government. We're here to help type mentality. They don't want to work with the government. And I think you're going to get that with any program that you have, government program, but we're not regulatory. We're there to really help. And I think when we do have the next generational farmers with some of the farms, I think we'll get more participation. There seems to be a shift in that mentality, that want to do the right thing for their farm and for their land and for the environment. So,
All right. Good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question for both Ryan and Kelly. This is Maureen Leupold. I'm vice chair of the Oaxaca Creek Watershed Committee. And one of my concerns is that it sounds as if our management plans for both Black Creek and Oaxaca Creek that those coalitions had put together are kind of important when it comes to some of this grant funding. And what's happened with Black Creek Watershed, they really don't have a coalition anymore. What's happened is they've aged out. Okay, so the really passionate people that got it going and kept it going just can't do it anymore. And somehow we haven't been able to bring that next generation up. It's a concern to me because I can see that could possibly happen with Oaxaca Creek Watershed too. And as you know, we're pretty darn active doing stuff. So what kind of help could we look for to, I don't know, maybe get these things going again? And, we're all volunteers, and that may be the problem, is that we don't have any kind of agency person or anybody that can really, stay on it, like even part-time every week or whatever. So just a question out there.
Kelly, do you want to answer first, or?
Yeah, so Ryan and I chatted about that when we were chatting about this presentation. I told them that Black Creek wasn't active anymore and that there has to be a way to engage that group again and recruit folks from the community to participate in both OACA and Black. I think we have to have further discussions on how we're going to do that to light a fire in people to want to do that. I don't know, Ryan, you can go ahead.
Yeah, it's always challenging when you lose the passionate people that started an initiative. And one of the things I've been tossing around is I'm involved with a couple of different environmental education groups, and maybe that could be one way to bring in younger folks into the fold to get them working on stuff, because that's at least personally how I'm going to interact with people that are younger, is like things like Day in the Life and like the GLEE program that Sea Grant does, events through the Water Education Collaborative. So I think those education opportunities and maybe like tabling opportunities are how we reach some of the younger folks. But yeah, it's certainly a challenge. It's something that we discuss both for these watersheds and other watersheds all the time. So something that we're working on trying to address. I know I mentioned we're updating the Great Lakes Action Agenda, and when we roll it out, we're going to start reconvening our regional work groups around that, and hopefully we can bring some people in through those. So there's a couple ways we could go about it, but it's definitely going to take some work.
And I really think we need a position, and it seems like there is money out there directed towards the same things that, both of our groups were trying to do. It sure would be nice to have a small line of funding to be able to implement somebody that can actually make it a job, that they keep people involved. We don't have the means for that. We're just, like I said, volunteer and just donation based, and that's about it. But thank you.
Yeah, that's good. It's a good question.
I would like to echo what Maureen said, and I think these groups are stronger when there's a hub that is a person who's at the center of it, doing the administrative work, keeping up the email list. It needs to be a dedicated employee, whether it's someone from county planning or soil and water or some other group, or an employee of the coalitions. But I think that's really the key. And then that person can work with Ryan and Kelly and everyone to get more involvement. But I think, Maureen, hats off to you. I think you all have done an incredible job with the Watcom Creek Watershed Coalition. I know Black Creek has been struggling for a while. They had their heyday and hung in there for quite a while through a lot of adversity. But I just want to really put a fine point on that some dedicated staff time is needed. These are big sub-watersheds to the Genesee River.
Thank you, Rochelle. And I'm reflecting on when you started up Black Creek Watershed Coalition, and you were the person, you were the point person, and it just flowed. So when you had to leave, that's when things started to change quite a bit. But thank you for your initiative, at least at the beginning. Appreciate that.
Yeah, sure. My pleasure.
So what you're saying is we need to find some money to fund Rochelle to start running the Black Creek Coalition again.
Great idea, Kelly.
I have a question. This is Joe McCarowitz, and Brian and Kelly. I'm so encouraged by the fact that the 9-element plan has happened. And for many years, the Genesee River watershed has been neglected in my mind. And one of the reasons we did some of the work back 10, 12 years ago. And so I encourage you and I wish you the best of luck in continuing. I do have some questions for you though, and that Brian first, in terms of that the 2050 deadline for high priority, is that going to be achieved in terms of the 9-element plan? Because it seems like it's 8 years into it now, and it might not be.
And so for the high priority watersheds, I mentioned this briefly during one of my slides, but we've been, as I was reading through the plan and seeing like the evaluation metrics and like doing milestone reports, I was thinking about, and some of the work that went into this, I was thinking about doing a deeper dive into evaluating the progress on the plan. So without doing a real deep dive and getting putting numbers to everything, I can't comment exactly how far along the path we are, like what percentage complete I'd say we are, but I think it would be a worthwhile effort to work with some of our partners, both with the coalition and maybe RiverWatch, some of the other partners, to develop an evaluation of the plan and see where we stand currently. Because I think, yeah, we've still got a few years left to the high priority sites, so we could identify where we might need to focus a bit more of the efforts. But yeah, I definitely am, like I said, I'm interested in doing a a more in-depth evaluation. So if anyone else is interested in collaborating on that or working on that, please reach out and I'll be happy to get something going.
Yeah, I'm curious about, I understand that Genesee RiverWatch submitted a report and perhaps even a proposal on looking at some of those wastewater treatment plants. Not necessarily all the ones that have been indicated, but some of the smaller ones which don't fall under the rulings that are regulations that you've set up in terms of 1 million gallons and so forth, but they're small wastewater treatment plants that are in small creeks that are really highly impacted. And I was wondering if there's anything that's happened with all that. What's the status of that?
With some of the smaller creeks, I'd have to look at individual permits specifically, but I think when we do the full evaluation, I'd bring in our permitting staff from Region 8 and 9 who oversee all of the permits, because they would have the reasoning behind why the limits have or have not been implemented, whether it's a cost basis and either if it's a publicly owned treatment works, if the counties aren't able to afford the upgrades or they don't have the capacity to go after grants. So I think there could be a number of reasons why they don't have limits if they are. I know some of it could be just the design flow rates, but again, I'm not a permitter, so I don't want to overstep here and comment on something I'm not fully read in on, but I definitely would, when we do the full evaluation, bring them in to like talk a bit more and go through permit by permit to see what we're dealing with.
Have you seen that report?
The RiverWatch report, I think it was, what was it, 21, George, that came out?
Yep.
Yeah, George sent that to me a few months ago.
You know, the other thing I noticed is that, you know, the 9-element plan says sediments, nutrients, and pathogens. And I know for a fact that some of those smaller watersheds have pathogen issues or potential for that. And is anything being done along those lines?
I know that we've, through some of the grant programs we've mentioned, DC and other entities have been funding disinfection at various wastewater treatment plants. I'd have to go through the list of grants to, or the list of grantees rather, to see which sites have had it implemented. But I know the last time that I looked through one of those grant award announcements for all the consolidated funding application awards that were put out last year, that there were quite a few Great Lakes Basin sites that got funding for disinfection. But again, I'd have to go through the list and see exactly which of those were in the Genesee Basin.
You know, one of the things, just talking outside the box here a little bit, is that you and Kelly have done a very nice job in presenting everything, but you talk about success in terms of funding and it's completed. And one of the things that really needs to be done is what is the impact on the river itself? In terms of one of the goals of 9-element is adaptive management. And you have no idea, it seems anyways, that, you know, has phosphorus levels decreased in the river? Have loadings decreased? The stuff that USGS is only 6 times a year when they do it. And you can't really estimate any kind of values for loads or concentrations based on 6 states. So it seems that we need to move forward with a monitoring program that's more in depth, that can be compared to what was the data collected in 2010, which was very intensive to see where we are and how we're doing. Any feelings about that?
All right, I was just writing that down, but I know that there had been some expanded sampling, as I mentioned, that DEC and USGS did between 2013 and 2018, but I don't think that was nearly as extensive as 2010. I know one avenue that we could go to collect data would be through DEC's RIBS program, that if we could try to allocate additional funding over to them to do expanded monitoring in the Genesee Basin, that could be one avenue. I know when I mentioned Monroe County does quite a bit of sampling in the lower Genesee at least, and I'm not sure exactly what the extent of the data is collected there, but I don't know if Kelly or Andy could comment a bit more there.
Yeah, Andy, are you on?
Yeah, I don't see his. Oh, there he is.
I'm here.
You knew you were going to get wrapped into this.
Yeah. We're still doing, we've had a long-term sampling location at the mouth of the river, where we do a grab sample there monthly. And, we've been doing that for probably over 25 years. We did recently pause our water quality work on Honeoye, Watka, and Black Creek. And we used that money to install 4 new stream gauges in the county in some of our more urbanized areas, where we're looking more at flood hazard, and we want to just get a better feel for stream flow in some of these other locations. That's as of 2 years ago. We've paused that Honeoye, Watka, and Black monitoring. If there's a need for more Genesee sampling, we may or may not have the capacity to do that. We've in the past we've used some FOPA funding to support the USGS program. So, and I know Dr. McCarowitz has done extensive work, and I'm a monitoring guy. So I think the numbers tell the story, right? If you can come up with a frequency and a location that gives you good quality data, then that's something we could certainly talk about some more.
And go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I just think it's a great idea, and I would, Andy, if this was to go forward, I think it would be most comparable with the 2010 and simplified by doing it at 4th Street, and to consider, you got a USGS flow station there, so you can calculate loads, and plus you can easily compare it to 2010, and it's easily accessible. So it's a thought, and it's an adaptive management strategy. So as you go along, or as we all go along, it'd be great to do something along that line.
Now, USGS is already doing water quality. They're still doing water quality at 4th Street, right? That was my understanding, that was going to be a long-term water quality station.
They sort of, Brian would know better. I've kind of lost contact the past few years. But the thing is that when they have done, it's only been 6 times a year. And in terms of the high flows and low flows, and you're aware of this, that under those different kinds of flow regimes, the concentrations change dramatically.
Yeah.
And so it needs to be a more intensive sampling that takes into account those flows during crazy periods of high flows and low flows, when concentrations are different. So it needs to be more, at least based on what I've seen in the past from USGS. It's very minimal.
So, not to throw them on the side here, but Val, if you want to take a second, Val Schull, who's on the call, has been doing some concentration flux and modeling work for the Genesee Basin, and I think some of their work could help answer the questions that you're asking, Joe. Val, if you're on and feel like commenting, if you think that your work would fit in well here, that would be great.
Yeah, I could just give like a pretty brief overview in terms of what we've done so far. So I've been using, along with Brett Hayhurst, the USGS WRTDS egret model to be able to essentially estimate concentration and flux at different monitoring sites within Monroe County and the Genesee Basin. So right now what we've done is looked at a couple of water quality parameters, such as like phosphorus, nitrate, total suspended solids, and chlorine, for example. And then also try to see if there was any changes in terms of those concentrations and fluxes, and if they could be compared across the 3 sites that we've just started to look at. So those included Genesee Ford, Genesee River at the bridge and Ford Street, Arundecoit Creek, and Owatka Creek, and the USGS monitoring stations that are located there. And one of the things that we wanted to look at as well is see like the BMPs and try to gauge whether or not we could be able to tell a story, essentially like map them out temporally in terms of like when were the BMPs implemented in areas close to these sites, and can you see any changes at all in terms of those concentration and fluxes. And so I'll be meeting with a couple of people. I was looking through the participant list, and I see that there's some familiar names on the list. Ryan, thank you so much for looping me into this conversation and connecting me with people on the call here. As well as, I've reached out to Joe, for example, when I first started at the New York State Water Resources Institute. So it's nice to, put a face to a name. And, but like, yeah, the goal was to try to map it out in a way that could potentially tell a story. I'm not sure yet, just because we're still gathering data, and, it's good to learn about like the BMP database, and just as a curiosity, would it be possible to maybe collaborate or connect with people and being able to use that data set for these types of goals?
That's great, Val. Can you tell me how often the samples are taken?
Yeah, I actually was looking at the Genesee Ford data set and looking at it just because I was doing a different project, and I was curious and trying to pull out some trend assessments for an index. And for that monitoring station, I believe there are about 223 samples for total phosphorus. I was looking for at that specifically yesterday, and that was over the span of 2011 to 2021. So that's roughly about what 20 samples per year, roughly.
That's a lot of samples over a 10-year period, but not over an annual period. No, it's great. I'm glad you're doing something. What I would encourage is to try to move to a more intensive sampling scheme, particularly when it comes to events, hydrogeologic events. So.
Well, coming from an industrial background, it would be an interesting exercise, perhaps, given some of the numbers that Kelly has described on the amount of money being spent in the watershed on grants, and I don't think those included any of the grants that we've gotten and done projects on. But to compare the amount of money being spent on what is essentially quality control measurement to the amount of money being spent in the watershed on trying to control particularly phosphorus and sediment that are the target measures.
Yeah, and those numbers that I presented are just agricultural. That doesn't account for all the work that you guys are doing and stream bank stabilization projects. I mean, we have tons of those that we can put numbers to in the watershed, and obviously stormwater projects too. This was just specifically agricultural work, and we'll be able to put numbers to those BMPs once we finish the final step L modeling component with Bergman that they're working on right now. We'll be able, as Ryan showed, what that target is per year from ag BMPs. I am confident we're going to be over that in 2025. But
Kelly, aren't those estimates? They
yes,
really don't show what's actually happening in the river.
correct. It's not sampling, but it's, you know, one of the reasons DEC funded this project with the database is so we could put numbers to all the work that's going into the watershed for agriculture. So yeah, I'll be able to provide that information to DEC and Cornell and with these reports into ag and markets. But you're right, that has nothing to do with sampling the river. This is just putting numbers to the practices. So the efficiency rates for all those farm practices have been built into the database, but you're right, they're estimates.
So you know, I think what you're doing, and I understand, you know, everybody wants to justify what they've done, and that's a good way of doing it. But ultimately, we have to understand there's legacy sediments and phosphorus in the river, and are we impacting that? And you don't find that out by unless you do actual measurements in the river.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. I appreciate that discussion. It's very good.
I was reminded the other day of Deming's comment that without data, you're just a person with an opinion.
Yeah, well, it just to echo what Joe is saying, we did submit a proposal to Don Zelazny maybe a year ago to do monitoring on the river to try to duplicate some of that work. I'm sure it's a funding issue. It's also, you know, DEC does some of that stuff. So maybe we can get to that point someday and have some regular data that we can show progress on. So.
Yeah, well, I think that's true. And I don't know if it was Kelly or Brian mentioned the RIBS program, but the RIBS program, unless it's changed, is an invertebrate monitoring program that can tell you, yeah, it's better, it's eutrophic or it's not eutrophic, but it doesn't really allow comparisons, legitimate comparisons to water quality data from 10, 11 years ago.
Yeah. Okay. I don't want to carry over unless people do. I'm here for as long as necessary, but I appreciate Ryan and Kelly making the presentations. I know this is a subject that people are interested in. Of the 4 summits that we have scheduled, this is the 3rd one, and this is by far the most interest that we've had, both people who actually showed up and people who have registered. So obviously there's some interest, and we need to try to communicate it more, I think, to let people know what's going on. But I think there's a lot of good work out there, even when you don't combine it all together. I mean, you look at all the work that's going on, it's amazing. Just question, is it having an effect that we can appreciate, so or see? So are there any more questions? If not, I'd like to thank everybody. We'll be posting these recordings. Unfortunately, I missed the beginning part of Ryan's thing. I even have the darn note right here in front of me on my computer. I missed it again. The last one we had, one of the participants reminded me at the beginning early enough. So I asked people from our board who happened to show up to please try to do that at the next one so I don't forget. But I would appreciate, Ryan and Kelly, if you could send me your presentations that we could share. That would be good.
You got it.
Do you have a way to share those, George? Do you have a file transfer site, or do you have access to Google Drive? I mean, because there's no way I'll be able to send it. I don't
Yeah.
think it'll go through. as a
Right,
PDF.
yeah, I personally use,
Oh.
what do you call it there? Shoot, we transfer. It works for me. You can do up to a gigabyte, I think, something like that,
Yeah.
so.
That could work, or Kelly, I don't know if you modified your presentation at all after you emailed it to me last night, but I've got Kelly's and I can just use DEC's file transfer service. And I just have to like plug your email into it and I can upload the files and it'll send them right to you.
Okay, great,
Perfect.
Yeah,
All
so
right.
I can send them yours as well.
great, thanks, Ryan.
Yep, no problem.
One little, one last thing here. We have one more summit coming up next Thursday. And it's really talking about, we talk about the Genesee River and we've talked about it from a technical standpoint, a water quality standpoint, but one of the questions is about getting more people interested either in or in the river or near the river to see it and to appreciate it for what it is. And so we're going to have an update there on the 26th from a wide variety of folks. I don't know if Mike has the agenda there, but we have speakers to talk about Rock the Riverway, which is going to certainly generate a lot more interest and visibility of the river. Talk about things that are going on in various other parts of the watershed relative to increasing access to the river. So hopefully you, if you're interested, you could have a chance to come. All right, well, thank you, everybody.
All right, thanks,
Thanks to
everybody.
speakers again.
Thanks for
Appreciate it.
being here, everyone.
Thank
Talk to you later.
It's great. Really nice to see everybody.
Yep, bye.
All right,
Hi,
Bye-bye.
Maureen.
bye-bye.
Nice job. Boy, a lot of data, holy shit.
But not enough.
Okay, Mike, looks like you and me.
Guess it's just us, right?
Yeah,
All right, well, I'll see you at 11:45.
and that drive is just off of Scottsville Road, right? I looked it up.
Yeah, number 50 Airport Drive.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, if you can stick it in your.
Yeah, I
Google.
did. I just wanted to make sure I had it. It's, let me just look here. Air Park
Actually,
Drive.
There's a fairly good sized building that is their headquarters, and I don't think that's 50. 50, I think, is the
No.
new one bought next door.
Yeah, that Cook Properties is the name of the sponsor.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yep.
Yep.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I'll see you there.
See you there. Be there or be square.
Yeah. Thanks.
Or be in trouble with Gabby.
Yeah. All right. See ya.
Yeah. There.